Welcome, everybody, to Unexpected Points. I am your host, Kevin Cole. We are going to, and by we, maybe I should just do a little introductions first. Benjamin Robinson of Grinding the Mocks. You can follow him on Twitter and make sure I have this correct. At Ben J, just Ben J.
Just say Grinding Mocks, yeah. Just at Grinding Mocks, and you can. If you want to find my opinions about Liverpool Football Club and other things, you can find them on my personal handle.
Yeah, it's a rough year for Liverpool. I'm going to get it. Don't worry. I'm going to change this. I'm going to change the whole format to unexpected goals when we get into the summertime during the downtime.
Let's go
for the NFL. But
football.
Ben is doing the best work out there, collecting, waiting, displaying, and sending me some of the information so I can put it up there too, and some others, the work that he does at Football Outsiders for all the mock draft data that had happened. So now we're coming post round one. We'll go through the round rather than try to hit, too many thematic things right up top. We'll kind of go through pick by pick, not spending too much time on certain picks, and I'll explain why in a second, and then go over some of these concepts. But I was wondering, this is what I had you prepare, at least a little bit coming into this, is that at least when I was on a live stream last night, the ship chasing live stream with a bunch of guys, degenerates, of course, who are betting on the NFL draft, it was chaos early on in the draft because CJ Stroud, who, if you had a longer timeline you were looking at, it seemed pretty reasonable for him to be up in the top couple of picks. But if you had a shorter timeline and you're looking at mock drafts and expectations over the last couple of weeks, it was, not so much there. Anthony Richardson going 4 as opposed to Will Levis going 4. Will Levis not going at all in the first round, which is pretty unexpected versus some others. So looking at a pure data perspective, not just going on our feelings here, what did you find about this round, the accuracy of mock drafts, which kind of encompasses the accuracy of what we were hearing out there and our expectations coming into the round?
So I think we've been a little bit lucky the last couple of years, especially last year. Last year, the top 32 picks, the first round, 30 of them were in my top 32. This year, only 26 out of 31. So we went down kind of more towards a little bit of what we had maybe in like a 2021 or something like that. So yeah, accuracy overall was pretty good. I'd say we're back on like 26 is about a little bit around the historic average. Usually we're around 25, so a little bit over the historic average of the number of players that I would match between my first round and that draft's first round. But yeah, it turns out I think that maybe if we had kind of stopped the count last week, the most accurate mock draft that you usually get is one that came out this past week, maybe the last couple of days. Yeah. And I think when it's all said and done, the most accurate single mock draft that I had is a mock draft by a writer from USA Today named Michael Middlehurst Schwartz, and that will have come out last week, more than 10 days ago. So I think that potentially over the last 10 days, we kind of overthought the kind of process behind the ideas of these picks. And so it's really interesting to see the draft last night. And I think that, it's just one more argument that draft season is too long. So make the draft season maybe 2 weeks shorter. I think I'll be happier.
Yeah, well, we got to get that content out there. So I don't know about that, but
condense the content, more the
content. What do you think about the theory? And this is going to be highly speculative compared to what I'd like to do on this podcast. But what do you think about the theory that clearly Goodell and the NFL doesn't want, if they can, a on the record confirmation of this is who the first round pick is. I mean, this is the first pick of the NFL draft is going to be. I mean, it kind of came out here. It didn't come out until like the day of in 2018 with Baker Mayfield. We kind of didn't know last year with Trayvon Walker. It was up in the air a little bit there. But even further, maybe we're even going further down the draft here. We're starting to get an idea because if we think back to 2016, at least, when the Eagles traded up to the second pick from the Browns, that was well in advance of the draft. I mean, that was like a month in advance of the draft or something like that. And I presume they made that move not saying we'll take Goff or Wentz. They might have said that publicly, but I think everyone knew that Goff was going and then who Wentz would be available. Is there some possibility that there's just been a shift as it's become a bigger and bigger business, as it's become more tied to gambling markets where we have this like inside information potentially out there, that it's tougher for the insiders to get like really good information on this because the NFL doesn't want it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in that. The thing that I would bring up too is, the sports books mostly lose money on the draft. It seems I know they got creamed on the NBA draft this past year. I think there's just there's a lot more maybe people in terms of thought leaders on the NFL side because of how much bigger it is than the NBA is. But yeah, no, I think they have every reason on the money side to kind of have more talk, to kind of hype up the draft into something probably more than it is, but still to hype it up as much as they can.
Yeah, I did appreciate Shams coming into NFL world and tipping these picks well in advance of the NFL insiders who are probably not supposed to do that.
Yeah, he must have a contact at the agency that he gets all his NBA stuff that has the NFL vertical, and so that's probably
he wasn't even using the good like Woj language where he would say like, "Oh, I hear that this team is thinking about getting closer to whoever." So I don't know what the hell language was, but it wasn't like they're actually going to take him. Or he just pretty much flat out said, "Sources says they are taking him." Okay, so well, let's go through the first round here. I want to though set out the overarching philosophy for me looking at this. You may differ a little bit, Ben, but I think we'll be in somewhat at least an alignment on this. What you're going to hear most about today, and again, this is unexpected points. You're not going to hear what you're necessarily going to hear in a lot of different places when analyzing the first round of this draft. Is you're going to hear the Eagles, probably number one, maybe some other teams got players at value versus where we thought they were going to go. So therefore, they are the winners of the draft because 99.9% of the analysis that goes into the draft is player evaluation based type of analysis. Now, of course, the work that I do, the work that some other nerds are doing out there tries to look at it from more of a positional value standpoint, frameworks to look at it, not look at specific players. But that's what most people are doing, specific players. And those same people are now doing the grading. So, of course, if that's their focus, if that's their core competency, everything else, they're going to say, "Oh, this player, that they got as a steal was the best player." I don't adhere to that sort of philosophy, though. I do track where players had gone, and we'll talk about that versus consensus big board versus your estimated draft position. And even Timo Riske at PFF specifically looked into this, and I think it's logical, and now we have empirical evidence behind it that steals are not really a thing. Reaches are a thing. So players who are taken way before their consensus position on the big board tend to underperform other players at that draft position. They underperform what you'd expect in the draft position. Someone who is taken way later than their consensus. So let's say Nolan Smith in this first round that a lot of people talked about. Those players do not overperform. They pretty much perform in line with what you would expect for their draft position. They're not any much better. So the empirical evidence shows that. And the logical evidence, I think, is even stronger here, is that, like, what is more likely to happen? You only need one team, and these teams have vastly different boards, right? You only need one team to say, "We believe in this player, and I know that they're supposed to go, we think they may go quite a bit later, but our board says X, so we're going to take him in this position." And when they do, and it's a reach, you need one team to make an error, one team to make a mistake. Whereas if we're talking again, and I'll talk about this Nolan Smith pick again, and Nolan Smith, we're talking about like an edge type of player, right? That's going to be playing out there, a useful player. He's a little bit on the undersized side, but I think he's still going to be used that way in the NFL. If you're saying, "Oh, well, this guy should have been number 10 versus number 30," well, we have 20 different picks there. Lots of edge or defensive end or outside linebacker type of players who've gone. Lots of teams who have that need. Each one of those teams would have had to have made an error in order for this to be a real 10-spot gain that you got, or a 20-spot gain that you got. And that's just much, much more unlikely to happen. So that's why I think the logic and the evidence points to, let's not throw too many flowers at these teams who are getting players who are quote unquote steals.
Yeah. To me, the real steal of the first round is the Raiders. Tyree Wilson, the edge defender from Texas Tech, who I kind of compare the situation similarly to last year's draft with the offensive lineman Ikem Ekwonu from North Carolina State, who was drafted by the Carolina Panthers, sort of in a similar spot. Thought of as like probably a top 3 player, and fell like 3 or 4 picks just because Other teams had kind of a little bit of a different view on the board. And so to me, I feel like, yeah, Tyree Wilson is much more likely to succeed as a player in that vein than like a Nolan Smith, who, multiple edge rushers were drafted over him. Even players who I thought he had like a pretty close comparison to, like a Lucas Van Ness, who I thought had a really good chance of going early. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Jalen Carter feels like a great get, a little bit of a steal, not the hugest of steals because he was kind of regarded more as like a top 5 player, but still within the top 10. But yeah, to me, yeah, I think you're right to kind of slow the roll a little bit on, well, we got both of these guys, but I don't know, maybe there's like some sort of bonus points for getting all these Georgia players together.
Maybe that was part of the narrative behind them going after Jalen Carter in the first place, is they'd add him to all these Georgia players. But I mean, we'll see. It's not, these guys could work out. They could be great. It's just, I'm not that confident in it. And I just think it's also logically, fallacious to say that, oh, wow, genius pick by, to get Nolan Smith at the 30th pick by Howie Roseman. I mean, did he use mind tricks on everyone else to not take him? I mean, if everyone thinks this is a genius pick, then it literally isn't a genius pick. A genius is like a genius has extraordinary type of thinking or perceptions. If everyone believes something, then guess what? It's not a genius pick. It's like the Joe Blow type of pick to go ahead and make that selection there, which it can be good, but we don't necessarily know. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, the off the field stuff I think is definitely what pushed Carter down.
Yes.
From being a top 5 pick. But if you think that the off the field stuff can be kind of ameliorated, right, or whatever, mediated by the fact that he has his good buddies who can maybe keep him in check. Apparently, according to reports, Jordan Davis, their first round pick from last year, and him have a really tight bond, and that he would be a really great influence on him. The veterans in the locker room. I could buy the argument that can kind of be mediated a little bit. But yeah. To me, I think the Jalen Carter stuff, I think that if the off the field stuff had not been a concern, I know that there were talks about other off the field stuff, like some of his like attitude and his work ethic a little bit. I think that wouldn't have stopped him from going in the top 5 if that were the case.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about a little bit more when we get to it, because there are some other things on Carter, specifically that there's now reports that people were holding pre-draft, supposedly, that are coming out now that says like the coaches hate his guts at Georgia is essentially what they said there. So we'll talk about that. So let's go through these picks, but I'll just state quickly the things I really think you can count on, which are not that exciting, are like draft capital that you acquired going up and down, and positional value. These are just like bets that we know on average you're going to benefit from. The evaluation stuff, which all these teams are excellent at, all these outsiders are excellent at, I'm a little bit more wary of assigning value there. So let's start at the top here. Bryce Young goes first. That one everyone nailed. Obviously, it was part of a trade down for Chicago, which was good, which is another trade down for Chicago after that, which was interesting that they were able to get a 4th round pick later from the Eagles to just move down one spot, which is not something you see that often there. So that's kind of pretty obvious that happened. CJ Stroud, number 2. The thing that's interesting with me was CJ Stroud, because you had some guys put their necks out there. Specifically, I believe Lance Zierlein, who works for the NFL, does a lot of their stuff, where he was pretty adamant. I mean, not to the point of certainty, but pretty adamant that he did not think this was going to be Stroud, that and he has contacts in that organization. This is kind of like, I guess he must be in Houston, because because this is like his thing. He does radio in that area. What do you think about this? Is this a misdirection campaign, or is there some possibility, which I think there could be, that they were really torn on what was going to happen, and eventually, I don't know if ownership someone stepped in and said, we're taking the quarterback here, even if we believe that maybe CJ Stroud will fall to 10 and we can trade up and go get him from our 12 spot.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Lance is usually pretty connected to stuff. He is based in Houston. The moment that I kind of thought that it might be CJ Stroud was when Daniel Jeremiah, also at the NFL Network, released his mock draft, and he had Stroud there. So to me, I kind of thought the moment that happened that, hey, I don't know, it might be the case. But I mean, technically they were both right, because Houston ended up with both Will Anderson and CJ Stroud. I'm a little dubious on the trade back up for Anderson. I was just talking with, Aaron Schatz from Football Outsiders, and he was saying, you have to believe that, the difference between Will Anderson and potentially like Lucas Van Ness is much bigger than the difference between Lucas, whatever you get from Will Anderson, and then also what you're going to get from potentially what could be a top pick in the draft next year, depending on how good or bad Houston is with Arizona.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of disaster, honestly. That trade up. It's not just that you have to think it's gonna be that much better, but there's also a bit of a kind of like macro, non-player specific sort of rubric you can have when you're in the top 5 picks is like this concept of surplus value. And for non-quarterback type of players, the surplus value, and even for quarterbacks to some degree, the surplus value really peaks around the 11th or 12th pick. It's exactly where they would have been, because you're typically getting the second or third best player at that position. And the research has been done by Massey Thaler and others. It's coin flip-ish. It's about 55-45, who's going to be better, 1 versus 2 in the position, and then 2 versus 3, and so on. So you're getting a marginally lower player, but then the salary you're paying is basically half. It goes down that much. So when you're in the top 10, even if you get a player who is worth, a lot, let's say it's like a $20 million a year type of player. And of course, there's going to be like some getting up to speed and doing that sort of stuff with the draft. In that third spot, you are paying a contract that's about $10 million a year. In the 12th spot, you're paying a contract that's $4.8 million a year. So you just have to be that much more right. And if you trade back, you don't lose the draft capital. So you have to be that much more right to get value with them. And you don't lose the draft capital. Maybe you could say for them, they just want a superstar. But I tend to think outside of quarterback, and we've seen like Patriots dynasties and others, like having a superstar, you can either try to acquire them a different way, or you don't necessarily need the top picks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I felt the same way. Like I said, to me, the chance that Lucas Van Ness or even Tyree Wilson maybe is better than Will Anderson. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in there. And I think the other thing is that you hear all the time in the draft circles about how it's really important to have conviction. You have to be certain about what you're doing. And I think that that's not 100% right. I think you need to have some healthy sense of the uncertainty of the outcomes, like you were mentioning. And I think that's one of the things that makes the draft season really tough, is that everyone has this sort of certainty feeling about it. But in reality, it's not anywhere near that.
Certainty sells. And that's why you're going to see it in the media. And it also sells inside of those rooms and how you project yourself to ownership. Like if you're very, very certain of something happening and it ends up happening, whether luck or not, you're going to look pretty good for ownership's eyes. And if you're uncertain and then you're wrong, I don't know if you're going to get credit for being uncertain. And you're wrong in that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, even the difference between Anderson at 3 and $9.6 million a year for his contract, and Tyree Wilson at 7 at $6.8 million, we're talking about somewhere around a third less that you're paying for those two players. It's just so steep. The contracts are so steep how much they go up at the front of the draft that it makes things a little bit difficult there. So that, I think it was okay, but it's quite a trade up there, because the total compensation that we're talking about here is the 33rd overall pick. So the first pick, actually, wait, is that the first pick? The second pick of the second round, and then a first round pick in 2024, a third rounder in 2024, and then they're getting back a fourth rounder this year. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot. And this, I think it might have been like a bird in the hand type of philosophy here. And this is what happens with teams a lot when they've made a trade like they made with the Deshaun Watson trade, is they have this extra draft capital, and it almost provokes them to say, well, why don't we use some of this to trade up because we have so much more? But the reality is, like, you need so much and so much depth that's not really the way you should view it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. You hear teams say that was like a bonus pick we never had. We want to kind of treat it as something that we can kind of maybe use to fuel a trade up or something like that. But yeah, there still is value in the surplus. There is value in the surplus value potentially on Anderson. But yeah, I think that it depends how you might think about next year in terms of discounting the value of the future first round pick. Yeah. So
I have his surplus value being about the same versus contract again as like Will McDonald as the 15th pick. Now, people may hate Will McDonald as a prospect, so I'm not getting too prospect specific there. About the same there, but then you think about like what it cost you in draft picks in order to get them, and then that's when it becomes doubly doubly bad in a way there. So Anthony Richardson is next. A little bit of a surprise there. I had Richardson as my quarterback 2 of the class, how I ranked them looking through everything. So I was glad to see him go there as opposed to slip all the way out. I don't have anything revelatory to say about this here, but I do think it was interesting that the Colts, and I think the Colts have always been well managed. Ballard, despite the fact that people can really harp on the fact that he didn't get the quarterback thing aligned more seriously, he hasn't been someone who's wasted a lot trading up. He's been very comfortable trading down. The fact that he couldn't be motivated into going up to 3, I thought was very interesting, because if he knew that 3rd pick was going to be traded, he didn't know. I assume they're not telling him, hey, the Texans are coming up to take this pick, because then he'd be like, okay, we don't care. The Texans already have their quarterback. But if they just said someone is coming up to take this pick, the fact that he was willing to sit there and wait, presuming that he wanted Anthony Richardson that much, it's interesting that he didn't get pulled into potentially moving up.
Yeah, I think that if I had to pick a team that was the luckiest of last night, it would be the Colts. Because in an alternative universe where someone does trade up somehow with Arizona to draft, probably, maybe draft Anthony Richardson, they would be left with Will Levis, who we now know, based on the revealed preferences of the league, is not a top 30 player. So I think, you can definitely say that the Colts were shrewd. And I think that it always pays to be able to take advantage of opportunities that luck brings you. And so, I was very, very excited by that pick. It was a bit of a reach in my data, but I view it the same way I viewed the Trey Lance pick. If it's going to be a quarterback, it's going to be one that's a first round quarterback, a top of the first round quarterback anyway, then I think it's fine process. I wish Richardson and the Colts the best of luck. I hope that Ballard gets to stay around long enough to see this journey to fruition.
So you're saying that Anthony Richardson will eventually be placed by Mr. Irrelevant. Is that what you're saying?
We'll have to see what this draft is, I guess. I don't know who the last pick is.
We'll wait to see when that does happen. Yeah, no, I thought it was good. I mean, there's also like a tipping point, right? Like maybe it's just too much. The Cardinals were asking for too much. I mean, we saw Trubisky, right? We saw the Trubisky deal where they went up one spot. I think they gave up multiple fourths and maybe even a third or something like that. And, it does get pretty costly. And maybe, these reports that we're hearing, and I think the exact quote I was looking through afterwards because I wanted to see if I could dunk on any insiders for this Will Levis talk of being number 4. None of them were actually that overconfident, other than Todd McShay, who said the Levis love or hype or interest is real. Maybe there was real Levis hype. And yeah, you can see it looks foolish now to look at it, but sometimes it's, especially with quarterbacks, as I always use this musical chairs analogy, maybe there are just no more chairs left for people who really value this class. All you need is a couple of teams who may have been looking at quarterbacks decide, you know what, it's not worth it in the first round, and a guy who could have gone in the top 10 can slip out of the first round. It is possible. That's why I'm going to go back to my Galaxy brain take, that in the second round, if they like Will Levis, they should take Will Levis too. What do you think about that? Will Levis and Anthony Richardson? Everyone blow people's minds. They wouldn't be treated like this, but they could treat it like the fact of we spent 3 times the amount of capital on Anthony Richardson as we did on Will Levis. Everyone will view them more like a one-on-one quarterback competition. But hey, I'm not even joking that I might like that.
Yeah, I think the problem is that if you let's say that there's huge upside, I guess, if Levis is good, but I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it won't happen just due to just the
it's definitely
optics,
not going to happen.
The optics. But yeah, I mean, I think
those are valuable picks. So that's one thing I will say. Those are like high value picks, surplus value picks. But you pay the guy a $4 million bonus. Easy for me to say. Pay the guy a $4 million bonus, and then he's owed $5.5 million over the next 4 years. You could probably get a second round pick eventually back for Will Levis for $5.5 million over 4 years, and you get a free look at him.
Yeah, the thing that I come back to some of the articles you've written in the past. So that the Jalen Hurts article.
Yeah,
Jalen Hurts was valued appropriately. He was drafted in the second round. He was thought of as a second round pick. The thing about Levis is that he was thought of as a top 10 pick, and you're getting him in the second round. I think I don't know about the track record of that type of thing, but yeah, I'm not sure if I feel as
I'm trying to think. Let me just use my extremely small sample recency bias. DeShone Kizer, maybe?
Yeah.
DeShone Kizer was a guy that some people actually had as the QB1 of the 2017 class. which included Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson,
and Trubisky,
and he slipped all the way to 40 something, 50 something like that. So we'll see. Maybe that'll be the case for Levis here. And for a while there was like no success of these second round quarterbacks, at least like Drew Brees, who went at the very beginning of the second round. Then it was kind of a complete wasteland. But then you have Hurts now. Kaepernick maybe could have been a hit at one point, and it was going to happen. So maybe there'll be some precedent for these guys. I just feel like they're so cheap that I feel like you can learn a lot in just one offseason too.
We just don't. The feeling that I don't like about that is that we don't really truly know Levis's market value yet.
Yes.
We just still have his perceived market value. So, like, for example, I was thinking, oh, yeah, Malik Willis last year. He should definitely go in the second round. Well, he went in the third round. And same thing with Sam Howell. Oh, I thought he might go in the second round or third round. He went in the fifth round. Matt Corral, the same thing. So maybe I'm just like, have some quarterback PTSD from last year's draft. But I just think we don't know Levis's actual market value so much yet. And so to me, maybe he falls even further. I don't even know. And then suddenly if the Colts took him.
Yeah, that is a possibility. Maybe you field some calls for teams who want to trade up and see if any of those teams are like quarterback needy teams, and then I think take that sort of insight. Okay, I'm interested in your opinion on Devin Witherspoon at number 5, because the Seahawks were one of these teams that got a lot of credit for this draft, getting the cornerback 1 of the class. Eventually later in the round, getting the wide receiver 1 of the class. Now, again, this is one of these situations where this is not a player-specific sort of thing. But if it's like a Jalen Ramsey type of prospect, I kind of get a cornerback in the top 5. Otherwise, traditionally, it's been something that provided a lower tier. I would put in like the second tier of non-quarterback types of players. So you have the higher salary working against them, like all non-quarterbacks. And then you have the expectation for the value that you're going to get for cornerbacks. I mean, cornerbacks, even the top elite guys, get paid on a much different level than edge rushers, top-notch interior defenders, wide receivers now, and offensive tackles.
Yeah, the thing that stood out about Witherspoon is that I think the juice was that he was going to be the Lions pick at pick 6.
Yeah.
So basically, there's no
hope. The Lions are pretty explicit about the fact that they traded back because they're Brad Holmes, because they didn't, the guys they were hoping for didn't make it to them, and that had to be the guy, right? Like they wouldn't think necessarily Will Anderson was going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of my critique as well on the determinate nature of the draft. Like, because you weren't going to get Witherspoon, there's no one else there that's worth taking, and therefore you have to trade out. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's technically better than taking Jahmyr Gibbs at 6, but the
trading out wasn't the problem.
Trading out was not the problem. But yeah, so Witherspoon, I think it's kind of interesting. I think people thought that the Seahawks really dialed in on defensive line. Turns out not as much as people thought. And so I think that was kind of the far and away the top position. So the thing that was most surprising, I think, was not the player necessarily, but that they were targeting that specific position group, because he wasn't that far off in terms of where he was expected to go.
Okay, so now next is interesting with Paris Johnson at 6. That would have been a bit of a reach by the big board, not as much on the mock draft. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I had him as being 7th. So he went 6th versus 7th in the mock draft, but he was 11th in the big board. So according to big boards, he was actually 3 spots below Skoronski, who was the next, it was a third tackle to go in this class. So he was not seen as being the biggest guy. So maybe by the big board, again, reaches we care about a little bit. Maybe we care about that one a little bit there. And then the other issue with that is they move back up with a trade. And again, it's one of those, like, you have money to burn, money in your pocket, and you want to burn it there, is that you just decide that, guess what, I'm going to move up because I got these extra picks from the Texans, and then I'm going to move right back up again. So they give up the 34th overall pick in the second round and picks 168, which I think is in the 5th or 6th round. So it's kind of very, very near the end. And they also get back pick 81 as part of the deal. So they flip-flop a little bit there. A early second round pick for a late third round pick to move back up on this one. It's not a lot, so the price wasn't that significant. But again, it's just like you just don't necessarily like it that much when there are a few other tackles There are another 3 tackles who go after this. Maybe you could have just moved up 1 or 2 spots to have grabbed one of these other guys who seems to be an equivalent type of prospect.
Yeah, the big news about this pick is that there were reports that Kyler Murray told the Cardinals front office that he really wanted an offensive lineman and that he really liked Paris Johnson Jr.
Yeah, that was one of the few extremely accurate reports
rumors.
that played
Yes,
out perfectly.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So he was one of if not the highest, the biggest riser over the last week because it just came out maybe a few days before the draft that this was something that was a possibility. And so there were a lot of mock drafts, I think, that pushed him up, that had him at number 3, and ended up getting the team match right, but not the pick match right. But yeah, so to me, he was kind of a late riser to be the number 1 tackle. It was Peter Skoronski from Northwestern for the longest time. And yeah, my feeling on the big boards as well is that there wasn't any true number 1 tackle guy. So to me, the most skeptical of the tackle picks is probably, to me, Darnell Wright. I think Johnson was always going to be like the first or second tackle, depending on how you classify Peter Skoronski. And so to me, it was more interesting that Skoronski fell to be the 3rd tackle than that seemed like it was more likely that he would be the 2nd tackle. But yeah, the interesting thing for me was more about Darnell Wright than it was about Paris Johnson Jr.
Okay, interesting. It's actually a good comment here from the chat about Denzel Ward was picked at 5. It was actually 4, believe it or not, by the by the Browns. Now, that was also one I want to look back. Where was his consensus big board? Where was he? 9. So, yeah, I mean, it's possible to take even Ward, who's kind of been a hit. I don't know if he's been a massive hit. Like, I don't know if he's elite, and he also was paid. He got the biggest contract at the position. So yeah, I mean, it can work out. Don't get me wrong. It can work out there. It's not as much of an upside sort of play as a non quarterback. Okay. Tyree Wilson. We mentioned that a little bit. It's a guy that really might've been a coin flippish type of thing, depending upon who you pick. So you're getting him at a massive discount there for the Raiders. We're starting to get into this range now too, with the salaries decreasing, where you're getting some good value, and it's not like it doesn't necessitate really trying to trade out, in my opinion, for a non-quarterback. But then we get to Bijan. It happened, of course. We all knew it was going to happen.
I was right.
We didn't all know it was going to happen, but it
did
happen.
I did.
That was fun. 4th in the big boards. This is the disconnect. 4th in the big board, 12th in the mock draft, and I believe it was more like 19th before. So there was some steam of him coming up. Maybe more people placing him at 8 recently to the Falcons than before.
Oh yeah. He still didn't quite make it there. I was I've long said that I thought people were not being creative enough in the mock draft team player pairings with Bijan, and that because of the big board, the teams are just slave to these boards. And so I think it came out as well close to the draft that the Falcons had some massive top grade, like Bijan Robinson might have been their top ranked player or something.
Probably. They were willing to trade up to 1, but the Bears wouldn't take their picks. Yeah.
To be honest, I was more anxious about that pick than I was about any other pick in the draft. Yeah, I just was like, come on, Falcons. I don't have any money riding on it, but reputationally, that's what I've been saying for like a month. So
yeah. So that ended up happening. And okay, just to give you a little like surplus value here discussion. So what happens is, because the value amount is lower for him just based upon running back value, and maybe you can quibble and maybe he should be a bit higher. So he has a $6 million a year contract. So I think clearly he's going to be more valuable than that. And that's the point, right? But taken here at $6 million versus taken, let's say, at the end of the first round, which is kind of where I thought he would start to become a value. I knew it would never happen, of course, but that's where he starts to become a value. That's about 3 million. So 3 million versus 6 million. So half the price. And that's where you get a little bit of that juice there, that edge. Now, maybe he's a player who you are certain is going to be a top running back player. And that nowadays in the market is maybe like 15, 16 million type of player, but you have to discount it someone. And I think there's just too much with running backs where you assume he's going to step in and be the best running back in the NFL on day one. I'm sure he'll be very, very good, but I had him projected to be more in the 12 million sort of range. And that's a pretty good like number to project for a guy who we don't even know yet. He hasn't even played it down in the NFL for how much he's going to be worth.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that catches my eye is that, his starting salary, I think, will put him somewhere in the top 10 of running backs in the league. the kind of galaxy brain argument that I've heard about drafting running back in the first round is that if you know he's going to be great, which number one we don't, but even if you do say that, you get the 5th-year option for cheap. So you get him in his peak, and then you can let him go.
I mean, the franchise tag is cheap too, but yeah.
The franchise cheap, the franchise tag, the 5th-year option, all that stuff, and then boom, you're like living it up. Get 6 years of the running back and all the good stuff that comes along with it. No downside
I
at all.
thought we were supposed to be the assholes who don't care about running backs and their.
I know.
And these guys are like, yeah, you can grab them, chew them up, use the 5th-year option, and then toss them out to pasture. So
I felt conflicted because I was like, well, the analytics community take is that running backs are not worth the first-round picks, but I really wanted him to be a first-round pick because everyone was saying the NFL teams believe that running backs aren't as important. Well, this draft was another signal that, at least in the draft, the running back position is not devalued. Not in this one.
The draft is the last thing. This is something that I was also mentioning. There's a lot of people complaining on Twitter. And again, I probably shouldn't respond or react or even think about the complaints on Twitter. But a lot of people are saying, we've had enough of this running backs are overvalued talk. Let's just stop talking about it. Okay. And I mean, I get it. It's annoying, especially when you don't agree, which a lot of these people don't really agree. But I think it's also a function of exactly what you said. The draft seems to be the last holdout for this running back discussion. The contract that Derrick Henry signed, I forget what it is now, but it was $13 million a year or something like that. After that happened, I was like, that's fine. They weren't committed for very long. Dalvin Cook signed a contract. I was like, okay, whatever, that's fine. Zeke was the last contract where I was like, this is bad. They're locked in for too long. It's too much of a timeline. It's too much money. They don't have enough flexibility. Since then, I've been pretty much fine with every contract. The NFL is kind of caught up there. 4th downs used to be a big discussion. The NFL is pretty much caught up there. So we're not talking about that nearly as much as we used to. We still talk about this a lot because the NFL is not. There's at least a couple of teams that are just not there. And when you only need one team to make that pick, then it ends up happening.
Yeah, the Falcons are going to be really confusing on offense because they've spent in consecutive drafts under this regime with Terry Fontenot, who you artfully described the kind of hole that the organization was in. He's pulled himself out these last 3 drafts. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, and no quarterback that's really worth their salt to throw the ball to them.
Hey, so Desmond Ritter hate. Let's not this Desmond Ritter. He can operate the offense, which means he can hand off the handle. I mean, he could be okay, but he's a 3rd rounder, right? A 3rd rounder, you cannot be that confident in.
3rd rounder who people thought might be a 1st rounder. That's probably where that's coming from.
Just like everyone else in that class, yeah.
Exactly. Same problem.
Yeah. So we'll see with this. I mean, I get it. I don't. It's a bad pick, but what are you going to do, right? Some of these teams want to make that pick. Especially funny that Tyler Algier, if you look at him, he averaged 4.9 yards a carry last year. I'll take the under on that for what how efficient Bijan will be, because that's a high number.
If I were the Falcons, I would have tried to trade with the Eagles. Make them be willing to move up 2 picks. Tell them, if you don't do it, I'm going to take Jalen Carter. No, don't do it. Don't take Jalen Carter.
Yeah,
no.
Some Eagles fans. There's a great diss tape going out there, diss track about Arthur Smith, who from a Falcons fan who wanted excellent chorus in that, by the way, who really wanted Jalen Carter. It was good. It was a good one.
Homer.
Speaking of Jalen Carter, so Carter goes next. We kind of discussed this a little bit. I really don't like this trade up by the Eagles. They did something similar last year where they moved up 2 picks and they gave up a 4th and 2 fifths to move up 2 picks to go and get Jordan Davis, where I guess they're okay with doing that and whatever. I mean, it's not the biggest deal, but this one is really strange when it's 1 pick because you're moving up from, 9 to 10. You know that the Bears are highly linked to tackle. You kind of know the Bears probably aren't interested in the same player that you're interested in, or else they wouldn't go down. And they know, everyone knows what's going on. So then your concern is that the Bears trade it to someone else. And then you are doing better than that by throwing a 4th round pick. But would the Bears be willing to do that if they have to move down more than a couple of picks? Because then they may lose their tackle. So I don't know. I might call the Bears bluff on that, but I guess it's a 4th round pick. So it's not that big of a deal.
How dare you question Howie Roseman and his?
that's the thing. I would have to be anti. You don't have to be anti. Everyone is pro, which is why everyone hates me. But I was thinking about doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, no GM is perfect, and but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, they 2 years in a row they trade up for defensive tackle, um, and there has been in the Eagles are moving into this from this Jonathan Gannon scheme into this Fangio scheme with Sean Desai, and there's the Eric Eagers of the world who believe that the space eating defensive tackle is a real market inefficiency there, that could really be valuable in those defenses where they have the too high safety and they want to make the team run at you, that they have to double team Jordan Davis, and maybe now they'll have to double team uh, Jalen Carter too. And so it's a formidable front full of all these Georgia guys that they now have. I'm real interested to see what they do the rest of this draft to kind of help out maybe on the offensive line, as well as some of the new weapons they might want to bring in for now the second most paid quarterback in the league after this Lamar contract came through yesterday.
Yeah. We'll see. I just think like I just played it out kind of game theory in my head, and I don't see it being necessary. But whatever, fourth round pick. And again, nobody seems to care about it, so why not do it? Okay, so we mentioned Darnell Wright, who the Bears took at 10. This is them following their board a little bit more than what we saw. 16 in mock drafts, 24 in big board, which is interesting because that's actually flipped from Skoronski, who went next, who was 11 in mock draft, but 8 in big board. So a pretty big drop, 24 in the big board versus 10 where they were taken there. I guess in that way, I would be a little bit less enthused by that pick versus what the Titans did. But I think he projects as more of a true tackle. So if I had to say Skoronski may be a guard, then it would change my opinion a bit.
All hail the analytic cylinder, right?
Yeah, the analytic cylinder. What did it? You shake it up, and what did it spit out? It must have spit out
Darnell
on
Wright.
Darnell. There's those tiny little baby arms for Skoronski. They saw those, and the analytic cylinder was having none.
I mean, if you listen to what polls said, they value arm length. And
Yeah.
so, in this case, if that's so, then that's a value that they have, and who knows if it's analytically supported all the time or not. But yeah, that's something that I think we're Wright and Skoronski will be probably compared fairly closely for the rest of their career.
It doesn't seem to jump out versus draft position, but I think there are some problems like Joe Thomas had short arms or something. So then
Jonah Williams. Yeah.
So then it throws off everything. Okay. So now we get to Gibbs here, which is great. This was the pick of the draft, of course. I was actually surprised that people were that shocked by this pick because I actually wasn't that shocked by it. I mean, it was funny, but because it was only funny because I was like, Lions are killing it, trading back, this and that, and then boom, that they take Gibbs there. And the word that's coming out now, they're trying to do damage control, which is almost like pouring more gasoline on the fire today by contacting multiple insiders. One of the insiders, well, not insiders, but Dane Brugler, whoever, insider or not, he said that, and I assume this information is coming from the Lions. He said that the Jets were thinking about we're going to take him at 15, which I do not put past the Jets because I think Joe Douglas is kind of a donkey. So I don't put that past the Jets at all. So that was funny. Number one, that's like another dumb franchise was going to take him at 15. And then the second thing that came out, which is probably worse, is Tom Pelissero came out and said, "Hey, we would have taken him at 6, but we traded back. So isn't it like we overpaid for this guy, but we were willing to overpay even more." And we didn't. So give us, applause, please. He's doing like Jeb Bush. Clap, please.
I just don't know why you would take Gibbs at 6. Why don't you just take Bijan? If you're that dedicated to the bit, they must have thought that Jahmyr Gibbs was a better prospect than Bijan Robinson, which would put you very out of step with the consensus big board, for sure. But
there was talk. Remember, there was some talk. Now, talk is talk. That some teams, there was a team or maybe multiple teams that had Gibbs above Bijan. I wouldn't doubt it for them, if only because, like, DeAndre Swift is obviously dead to them. So he's completely dead to them. They did bring in David Montgomery in the offseason, and they didn't. It's not like they made a lifelong commitment to David Montgomery, but let me look up what they gave him this offseason. 3 years, $18 million at running back, $9 million guaranteed at signing, for a $5 million signing bonus. That's like healthy for a offseason contract. So I do think it was like they like to split up the backfield. They're going to want to use this guy a lot as, as the pass catching guy and maybe in some other formations. And yeah, it seems like they had him in the top 6 players on their board at least because they said they were willing to take him there. And, that's what it seems is. They weren't willing to take Bijan there. Bijan was there and they didn't take him.
Sounds like they kind of want some sort of like thunder and lightning thing. The thing about Gibbs that I think is a little bit misunderstood is that everyone thinks he's just a pass catching back, right? That is probably his main feature. The thing about him is that he really came off he's not a great pass blocker as far as I can tell. So he's not going to stay on the field as much on third downs, and he really wasn't a goal line runner. So to me, it's like you're gonna have to live with him kind of in between. I think he'll get a lot of opportunities because of the draft capital. So I think that's like the fantasy angle is that like, yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs should be someone that you're probably drafting up there along with Bijan, up in the like top whatever of your fantasy drafts for rookies. But yeah, to me, there's a lot going on in there. But I was very surprised. It's very over market. Listening to the pre stuff, and you played some Brad Holmes press conference fodder where you said it's all about the player, and in the drafts that he's had, that they've all focused on premium position players, and they really loved it. I'm not sure what they were thinking with the evals this year around. They were very very off market, not like the Lions that we've seen over the last few years that were very on market when it came to evaluating these prospects.
Yeah, I mean. It's okay. So I don't mind that much that he'll be rotating. I mean, all running backs are. I think, if anything, this idea of the 3 down back is like an overplayed sort of thing. I mean, Saquon Barkley had the most snaps of any running back last season, and I think he played in the high 60s or 70% of the snaps. So, like, even your top-notch guys are not playing 30% of the snaps at that position. So if you're doing 50 versus 30, yeah, it's a difference, but it's not as big as you think. And, down and distance kind of dictates what you're going to do. So I think he can't be very good on third down. I guess I just see like they have Amon-Ra St. Brown already as like a slot guy. So him, maybe matching up against a linebacker on third downs is interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
he's small.
It is. Yeah, he's a little bit under 200 pounds. So you don't see that a lot in the NFL. Now there's some comparisons, maybe like a Percy Harvin sort of thing. I mean, maybe we just want to see, you got to like see him run routes though.
Percy Harvin's a gadget player. Like, I don't know. Yeah. You don't draft a gadget player for the most part, I don't think, in the top 10, top 15.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, we've seen it before with guys like Tavon Austin, and it hasn't necessarily worked out so well. Okay. Luke Van Ness next. It's kind of funny that the Packers were a little bit upset about this pick. I mean, I don't see anything. This seems like a pretty standard tier 1 value, good player. Who knows? Could end up the best edge player in the class. You never know. And a decent value at 13. I guess they just wanted a wide receiver, and that's why there was some disappointment. You have anything to say about it?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I there's no way I would be disappointed if I was a Packers fan. This guy, I think. It was a really interesting narrative because he didn't start any games at Iowa, but he played the most snaps of anyone on defense. People said that was a knock on him. But yeah, I think Lucas Van Ness is an incredibly good prospect. I think he has a lot of potential. The athleticism is there. The Packers will fit right in with their edge rushing group, and he can offer a lot of value over the course of his rookie deal. So to me, if they're upset, then they should be upset at their front office for everything they've done over the past whatever number of years, because they haven't changed.
Yeah, well, maybe they are upset. Well, we'll hear if Jordan Love is struggling that they didn't give him a chance to succeed.
Maybe the Packers will go after Will Levis. Who knows?
Maybe we will see. That's I don't know how confident they are in Jordan Love, so anything's possible. Okay, Broderick Jones, tackle, again, tier 1 player for the Steelers at 14. Good sense, good value there. I mean, this is one of the highest value, surplus value picks because it's right in that range, and it's like one of the highest value positions, and it's not a reach according to the numbers.
And I mean, people were talking about how the Patriots really won the draft because they got Christian Gonzalez, who they might have been targeting around that time anyway, but then they also stopped the Jets from being able to get Broderick Jones. I don't know if I buy that narrative so much necessarily. I mean, it definitely can't hurt, but these rookie tackles don't always necessarily come in and light the world on fire. Jones is really good. That's very talented. Didn't start very much at Georgia. They only had maybe this might have been his only year starting. A lot of potential.
These are highly speculative. So that's the thing, is like there's also a disconnect where evaluators, I think, overvalue likelihood of success as being important versus like upside that you can get if you do end up hitting on this. I mean, clearly, like Bijan has a huge likelihood of being a success, but where does that get you is the question. Okay, Will McDonald at 15. This is the big reach according to the numbers for the first half of the draft. 34th according to estimated draft position by mock drafts. 36 by big board. So kind of by far the biggest of these early picks here. It is an edge player, so it's not a huge reach and an off-ball linebacker or something like that. But it's interesting, at least, because again, I'm not a huge fan of the Jets, and they're making quite a reach here. And people are going to talk about Nolan Smith and others who went later. They're really, I don't know if there's a teardrop here, or if they just went way too early. Because again, you take the edge here at 15. If you look at that position, there's not another taken until 28. So I presume other teams did not have this player, did not have McDonald in there. At this point, you probably could have traded back and gotten the same player. What do you think about this pick?
Yeah, I mean, I also viewed it as my numbers show that it was a bit of a overvaluation. I mean, at the time, we also thought that Nolan Smith was valued a lot higher than he actually was. So you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. It is an edge rusher. They could have potentially reached on an offensive tackle if they really, really wanted to. So I think almost anything that they would have done in terms of those two position groups, and that's where I think you wind up in this deterministic trap where you have to take an offensive lineman or you have to take something like that. And so to me, the player that made the most sense would have been another cornerback. I think that would have been kind of a really great move to pick up someone like Gonzalez, who was already, I think, a value pick there. You really could have kind of stuck it to the Patriots by taking the defensive back that they really wanted. So to me, when I see that sort of thing happen where you end up losing out on the player, you often do see kind of an overreaction sometimes. And I think the best move is just to kind of say, hey, like who's the best player available on the board at a decent position. But yeah, to me, on the market side of things, I'm a little concerned about what this pick, like how he'll perform. He played in a really interesting, like unique scheme in college. So there's like a chance that he kind of in the right NFL scheme that can kind of let him loose. He's also on the older side. So real interesting player. I thought he was a solid first round candidate. I thought that my mock draft data was probably undervaluing him in that way, but not to this extent.
Yeah. McDonald was one of many players, and I don't want to be too harsh here. Shout out to the ESPN probability model for when players were going to go, where I think they had like 100% availability for McDonald at the end of the first round. Obviously, that was overconfident and incorrect, as were some other estimates. The one that's getting a lot of hype is the fact that ESPN is like shooting itself in the face here by putting out this graphic saying that there was only a 0.1% chance that Levis would not be drafted in the first round. Well, obviously that was like, you shouldn't ever say that, being overconfident. So that seemed to be another issue here with McDonald. I just think for the Jets, they drafted like they were getting the last player in a tier where it seems like they really reached on maybe the first player in the next tier. That is more likely according to the numbers. Mm-hmm. So that's the value loss there.
Yeah. My model, because I have a probabilistic model, it's a private model that the outputs of which I sell to teams and stuff. It had the chance of, just based on the hierarchical model, so this is not in the context of like other players, just within the kind of posterior distribution of McDonald, it had the likelihood of him being drafted at 15 at like a little bit under 10%. So I think that if you put it in the context of all the other players in the draft, it would be small, but it wouldn't be 0.1.
Oh yeah, no, 10% is healthy for a particular pick. Yeah, that's fine. Again, I think it was negligible according to their model. Okay, let's get into the second half of the draft. This is when we have the cornerbacks and the wide receivers. These are positions I put in the second tier. Wide receiver, some people feel like it could be a first tier position because they're making so much money now, but I don't do that because the availability of the position in the second round is just much, much better than for tackles in particular, offensive tackles in particular, but also interior pass rushers or edge pass rushers. So we have, let's see, so we have two cornerbacks go off. Then an off-ball linebacker and an interior defender, and then 4 straight wide receivers and another cornerback. So really, these tier 2 types of players were just dominating this part of the draft, and it makes sense once you're not that confident on tackle anymore, once you're not that confident on edge rusher anymore, once you're not really that confident on interior defender, although one did go in this mix, and a couple went in the mix here. That's where you end up going. So I think it makes sense, but it's interesting to really see them clumped up like that, because that was really my takeaway when I was doing evaluation articles. These two positions go together.
Yeah. I was surprised that 4 wide receivers basically went in a row. That was that kind of a run I wasn't necessarily expecting. I also was only expecting that 3 wide receivers would go. My data had 4, and so my data ended up being right. I just thought that Quentin Johnson would fall out of the first round instead of being healthily in it as the second wide receiver taken. But yeah, to me, how the cornerback stuck out in there was really interesting as well. I think this is like no surprise that this is kind of viewed as like the sweet spot of this draft.
How do you update your priors here with Christian Gonzalez, who at one point I felt like post combine, because he really just destroyed the combine, was thought as at least being, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was never neck and neck with Devin Witherspoon, but it was close. And now not only is he behind Witherspoon, but he ends up being slightly behind Emmanuel Forbes, all the way down at 17. So he's one of the bigger steals. Again, I don't think steals should necessarily be a thing, but I do think it's a good position in that range because you're not spending a ton of draft capital. The salary is $4 million a year, so getting value on that is very strong. But do we have to update, like, should we just assume he's more like a mid-first round pick than a top 10 pick as we would have before the draft?
That's probably healthy. There were times where I think that the draft community was kind of waffling between if the Lions are going to take Devin Witherspoon or the Lions are going to take Christian Gonzalez. So I think it became kind of clearer closer to the draft that Witherspoon was kind of in his own category as the number 1, and then they kind of viewed Gonzalez as the head of the second, but that there was a second tier that he was also a part of. And so it's not so surprising. And, he was one pick from, one team away from being the number 2 cornerback. So he was pretty close. I'm a little wary on Emmanuel Forbes. He's a smaller guy with like great production. It's going to be interesting. We'll see how he handles the work here in Washington. But yeah, to me, I thought that Gonzalez, I thought he was such a good player, but yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we kind of need to like downgrade his kind of potential a little bit based on the draft stuff. But I'm sure that Belichick is happy to have him in the scheme. So
no, I think it's a great pick at that place. Plus, also picking up a 4th rounder in the process.
Yep.
Of moving down a bit here. Okay, so now we get to Jack Campbell. I think Jack Campbell, at least just by the absolute numbers, is the biggest reach, meaning it's 25 plus, 25-ish spots when we talk about either versus the big board or versus the mock draft. Now he's being taken later, so that 25 number, it doesn't mean as much as someone going first where they were ranked 26th, but it definitely means something. And what's interesting about this, though, an off-ball linebacker, because, again, this positional value, like a tier 3 type of position, just like running back, yet the ratings on the big board are also very low. I mean, 42nd on the big board, whereas the ratings big board wise for the running backs are actually much closer to their draft positions. Like there's this dichotomy between draft position through mock drafts and value according to evaluators. So like not only were they reaching on this guy at a low value position, but the big boards don't even like him that much. So what does that say? That means it's not even a positional value thing. Like people just really think he's not valuable.
I think the issue is beyond the positional value piece, which I think is also really important, that he wasn't even thought of as there was not a true number 1 linebacker in this class. I thought that there were going to be zero linebackers in the first round. I thought there was a healthy chance of that. I thought that if there was going to be a linebacker in the first round, that it would be somebody like Drew Sanders or somebody like Trenton Simpson, Sanders from Arkansas and Simpson from Clemson. But yeah, to me, it's just that, Campbell was not the clear head first linebacker. So it wasn't like you could even say that he was like the best linebacker in the class by, far and ahead. So you're also making a bet, not just on that he'll kind of be worth it from a positional standpoint when you could have taken somebody else, that he's going to be the best one, when we know that even just based off of the numbers that Massey and Thaler did, that it's probably a lot lower given the kind of closeness in the rankings and how far they were from being like worthy of that pick,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
from
I
a
mean, it's
pure
like
draft position perspective.
I mean, you can even more so than with the Gibbs pick, you can be pretty confident maybe Gibbs is actually the better player than the next running back because there's going to be such a vast difference until that next running back hit. What's really bad about this Jack Campbell pick, it's not only like the lower value of off-ball linebacker, it just it displays vast overconfidence in your particular specific evaluation on this player. Like you must think this player is way better than any other linebacker when you know no one else thinks that because you're just willing to take him so much earlier as opposed to again maybe try to move down at least. I mean, you didn't know this was necessarily going to happen, but if you did move down, it's very likely you could move down significantly and still get the same player. So why are you so tied into your evaluation? This pick in some ways is even worse in my mind than the Gibbs pick because the certainty in the evaluation, there's just no way it should be there.
Yep.
Okay, now we keep on going down here. Like again, all the wide receivers. Any thoughts on Dalton Kincaid going here first? Only one tight end in the first round where we thought that there could have been upwards of 3, maybe even 4. Not really, but 3 in the first round. Any thoughts on that?
So yeah, so Grinding the Mocks had 2 tight ends, and they viewed, I think let me look at the data that I see right here on my screen. Yeah, I had Kincaid at 20, at 20. Yeah, I think Mayer was also kind of around there too. So they were kind of
Yeah.
clumped more tightly together, and it turns
Yeah,
out
they were
that
the top 2 easily. Yeah.
yeah, I think that their expectation was a lot closer together than their actual draft position will be. I expect Mayer to go pretty like early mid second round now. But there was a lot of talk that there were a lot of teams in the first round that liked him and that he was. Some people believe that he should have gone first over Dalton Kincaid. Um, I was kind of surprised. I mean, yeah, I think that it's going to be an interesting addition to the offense in Buffalo. He brings like a component. They kind of, I've thought that Dawson Knox, their tight end, was a bit underused, and now it seems like that will be the case because they're going to throw Kincaid into the wash right away. My sense is that they wanted to make a splash in terms of an offensive weapon, and the wide receivers were not there or not justified, and therefore, hey, tight end, kind of treat him like a wide receiver and just throw him the ball a ton. So I thought it was intriguing. They also traded up, I think was a 2-spot jump with, they must have thought that the Cowboys really wanted Kincaid and get ahead of the Cowboys. So not surprised. The Bills kind of low-key like trading up in the first round.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Dawson Knox contract for a tight end, pretty damn healthy. $13 million a year is a lot of money for a tight end. This is a deal that was just signed a year ago. They can get out of it next offseason, but still at that point, they would have sunk in a pretty decent amount already into the contract. I think it was something like 17, $18 million bonus. They would have already have paid him another decent amount. I think it's about $20 million they would have been guaranteed, and then they'll have to kick him a little bit more. So like that was a big contract for tight end. So to come back again here in this spot, a little bit weird. Not a huge fan of it. For me, for tight ends, we're very, very, very bad at rank ordering these guys. I thought this class was very good. And my whole thing was don't be the team that takes the first one and then you find out like 3 probably nearly equally as good prospects go around later. And looks like it's going to happen to the Bills. So I would have advised against that. And they traded up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think there were some big boards that, prominent ones like Daniel Jeremiah who had Dalton Kincaid in their top 10, but he was kind of an outlier. So
Yeah. I just wouldn't move until someone else moves. Wait for one of these tight ends to go off the board. And maybe you really love Dalton Kincaid. Again, didn't test, was injured. I just could not be confident enough in him versus one of these other guys. So I let someone else move first. If you start to sense there may be a run, yeah, maybe you think about it a little bit there, but I wouldn't go for it there. We talked about Nolan Smith already. Perfectly fine pick. Looks great by all of the metrics here, but I'm not going to, toss give Howie Roseman even more credit than he deserves, and he gets all the time for that one. Any other overarching thoughts on the first round here before we maybe talk really quickly second round? If you have any opinions on how this may lay out or which prospect you're most interested to see.
In terms of how the first round went, I felt pretty good. Normally, the kind of 26 of the top 31 this year. So I feel pretty happy about that. There was a lot of talk that this is a very unpredictable draft, and it kind of was not so unpredictable. We've had more unpredictable drafts, but it kind of felt like a return to somewhat of like a more averagely chaotic first round. So I look forward to the beginning of the second round. I think I'm very interested in seeing where Will Levis goes of the players that are undrafted. Let me look at like the list that I have of my top players that did not get drafted. Pull it up. So the guys that I have that I'm most excited to see, like I mentioned, Will Levis, Michael Mayer, Joey Porter Jr., Brian Branch. I'm also really interested in Hendon Hooker. I was a little disappointed when he ended up in my top 32 because I just kind of felt there's like no way. But I'm happy to take the L on Levis because everyone took the L on Levis, but I didn't want to take the L on Hooker. So beyond the quarterbacks, Michael Mayer, I think I'm really interested. I think where the tight ends stack up. To me, the player that I think I'm probably most excited about to see though is probably Jalen Hyatt. I'm interested in see kind of which team he ends up on because I think the team that he ends up on, could get a really good player who can really, really make an impact on the vertical passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in the wide receiver because I think it did play out pretty well in terms of like who were the top guys. They all went in that sort of range. And then now after this, we have Jalen Hyatt. Where is he going to go? How much of a drop is there going to be there? And then it starts to get into other guys. Josh Downs, is he going to go before Hyatt? Will he not go before Hyatt? How do they feel about these big receivers like Mingo and Tillman? Are they actually going to go a little bit earlier? There's all this Tyler Scott hype. So it does feel like Hyatt's dropping, and Hyatt's honestly one of the guys that I like the best, at least as being able to like fill this role that you would want. So I'm interested to see if anyone takes a shot on him early in the second round.
Yeah, I'd be interested as well. I mean, I'm also interested in where some of these tight ends are going, like Darnell Washington. As a self-interested Bengals fan, I'm really interested in Luke Musgrave, the tight end from Oregon State. I think that would make a ton of sense for them to not target one in the first round, but to get one of these remaining big ones in the second round.
Sam Laporta, I think looks really solid.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, we'll check it all out tonight, starting at 7 p.m. Thank you so much, Ben, for doing this live stream. What else we got? We got Grinding Mocks at Grinding Mocks on Twitter to check out. What else? Anything else going on? You doing some more Football Outsiders work?
No, not particularly. That was it with the mock draft articles and the stock up, stock down. There's no more stock up or down to be had. It's just the draft. So I'll be enjoying posting some charts every now and then on the at Grinding Mocks Twitter page, and looking forward to taking a little bit of a rest, but plan to be doing some writing this season and this off season to kind of do some research and more R&D stuff in the summer with like a dedicated kind of sort of agenda of things that I want to tackle. So excited to be able to do that type of stuff.
Well, appreciate you spending the time knowing this is like your busiest time of the year right here, slamming everything together. But we'll see each other. We'll see each other on the mean streets of DC or Rockville sometime in the future. Maybe even catch a Premier League exhibition this summer and be watching that. So thanks so much, man, for making the time.
Thank you.